Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Aparutade sangamatassa tawara esodavanta bhamunjantu satang. This evening, listening to the silence, this particular temple I found probably one of the best places on the planet to meditate in. Well, you can meditate anywhere, but when we built this temple, the architect asked me what I wanted, what my intention was. And so I was just being facetious. I said, I want you to build a temple where as soon as stressed out people from London enter, their minds go silent. And he succeeded. So the nature of consciousness is silence, stillness, luminosity. Here and now. And the point of the Buddhist teaching is letting go of sankharas with wisdom, and not just because we don't want them, but because we use sankhara. It leads us to pure consciousness, or Dhamma, or Nibbana, non-grasping. So during this retreat, just emphasizing the powerful conditioning process that takes place in all of us, the identity, the self-identity, the conventional conditioning, social conditioning, the thinking process. Modern education is about acquiring knowledge from books, from teachers. So we're educated to think. We use reason and logic, developing a kind of skillful way of thinking. But it doesn't lead in itself toward liberation. And oftentimes the thinking process, we develop strong views, opinions about ourselves, about the world around us, about other people. And that's why the world is the way it is, why there's war and conflict and so much misery at this time. In reading the news is like, it's very sad to see so many, like in the Middle East, in Syria or Iraq, Libya, wars over what people think, particular positions they have, views that they're bound to out of ignorance. And so they end up destroying the country that they're trying to protect, and the slaughter of other human beings. For what purpose? What is it to get democracy or peace, or to get your own way? What is the goal? In the West it's democracy. In other countries it's something else, but it's a goal that is created by human beings. Usually the goal is ideal, like an ideal democracy. A perfect democratic system is an ideal, or a government anarchy, or socialism, or communism. They're all ideals of how things should be, how society should be, how things should be run. So we cling to these ideals, take sides for and against, and then we conflict, we fight, we quarrel, kill each other. Over what? Over empty sankharas. And this is what happens with the conditioning process. This is what conditioning is. It's like if programming your computer. When we're born, we start getting programmed. Or start being programmed. And then that programmed, I'm not against this, I'm not criticizing, but pointing to the limitation of conditioning even at its best. Even if it's all very good conditioning, it still binds us, blinds us to birth and death, and fear, and greed, hatred, and delusion. Because that's the nature of sankharas. They're not meant to be attached to. They're to be seen with wisdom, with discernment. And so that's what I've been pointing at with this emphasis on the Amaravati symbol, the way that the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned, nibbana, anatta, nirodha, all these words, even the word Dhamma, what does it mean? And we want another sankhara definition of Dhamma or nibbana. But the Buddha isn't pointing towards the future ideal state of a Buddhist world, everybody an arahant. That's not going to happen. Where everybody's enlightened, happy and wise. That's a lovely ideal. But right now, here and now, it's like this, isn't it? You're feeling this way. The situation is like this. And this way of noticing, of awakening, of reflecting on the here and now is unconditioned. Consciousness isn't conditioned. So in the Four Noble Truths teaching, the path, the Eightfold Path really amounts to consciousness knowing itself. It knows itself. It knows, it's complete and whole. And conditions, sankharas, phenomena arise and cease according to their nature, according to other conditions. But consciousness remains pure. And so the Buddha's teaching is pointing to return to, or to access, to notice, pay attention to the way it is. Here and now, at this very moment, it's like this. Consciousness knows that it's this way. Then on a personal level, you like the way it is, you don't like the way it is, it's too much of this or too little of that, and we get caught into the thinking mind that's conditioned through ignorance, through not understanding Dhamma. So the Buddhist teaching is really, a shortcut. Very clear, very accurate directions. How to realize your true nature. So then consciousness isn't personal. When there's just awareness and silence, there's still consciousness. When you're aware and you realize emptiness and nibbana, you don't drop dead. The body's still breathing, feeling hot or cold, pleasure or pain. It's like this. But consciousness, aware of itself, knowing itself. And as I said before, it's important to realize consciousness is not a critical function. It's not saying how you should or shouldn't be, or where you're right or wrong. It's not critical. That's the thinking mind. That's the conditioned thinking process we've acquired. So there used to be a pamphlet that I liked quite well, the translation of one of Lungpa Cha's desanas, was called Your Real Home. And so this is what it was pointing at. Your real home is in awareness, rather than in a particular place or under certain conditions that you might remember. Some people don't know where their real home is. But the real home then is here and now. It's not separate from you. And awakening to that is samadhi, the right understanding. So the Eightfold Path is called Eight Folds, not 8 steps. The thinking process, you can only think one thought at a time. You have to think samadhi, sama sangapo, sama vaja, sama. You can't say all of them at one moment. Impossible. But samadhi is what becomes apparent. It's right understanding, perfect understanding. Dhamma, consciousness knowing itself, this is the path. So with Buddhist meditation, bhavana, the Pali word for meditation is bhavana, is cultivating this path. I think first I must have samadhi, then I'll cultivate sama sangapo, and then that will lead me to sama vaja, and on like that. This way of thinking, isn't it? One thought at a time. But with samadhi, the rest, it's 8 folds. It arises together. It's not about time and going from one first step to the second step. In the elements, the 4 elements, the 6 elements. So much emphasis in early years in terms of vipassana was made about earth, fire, water, and air elements, seeing them as anicca, dukkha, anatta. But very little was ever said about space and consciousness. So that makes 6 elements. But without space and consciousness, there's no possible way the other 4 elements can manifest. So we can perceive space through seeing. Space is through vision. It's around us all the time. It's here and now. It's inside us, surrounding it. The temple is in space, the planet Earth is in space. But we don't need to look beyond the here and now, just beginning to notice, pay attention to space, reflecting on it. It has no other quality other than space. It's not beautiful or ugly or red or blue. But it's here and now, and it has no boundary in terms of our perception of space. We might see the boundary of the walls of the temple as containing space, but the temple is in space. Where does space end? In terms of the here and now. And so we're beginning to reflect on, rather than define, rather than think about it. You can't think about space, there's nothing much to think about. But it's certainly observable, isn't it? Awareness, sati sampajanya, it's like this. And to really observe space, you withdraw your fascination, your obsessions with the conditions, with the people in the space, the shrine, the symbols in the temple and so forth. You don't have to get rid of them, but just not go from one thing to another and just observe, aware, open, and it has no boundary. And it's non-personal. Even though some people, I've heard meditators say, this is my space, what are you doing in my space? But that's someone who's not contemplating the reality of space. It gives perspective, doesn't it? When we have space, we have perspective on the conditions in it. But it can be that which is never noticed, never consciously reflected upon, just taken for granted. And yet, at this moment, the space is the important thing, isn't it? This space allows us all to be in this temple. And this temple were just made out of cement, solid cement. We couldn't meet in it. No matter how ornately we might decorate the cement, it wouldn't fulfill the need for a temple. It would be a monument. So consciousness gives perspective on thinking, on feeling, as we reflect on the subject of consciousness at this moment. It's like this. And we're experiencing consciousness now. Everybody's conscious. That's a fact. And yet can be completely ignored for, our own program of ideals of meditation or our own feelings in the moment, our physical sensations or moods or emotions, or whatever they might be, would occupy consciousness, so that consciousness itself doesn't know itself because we're experiencing consciousness through senses, through seeing or hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. So mindfulness, sati sampajanya, is that escape hatch to pure consciousness. Conscious awareness. Then these words such as Dhamma, or Nibbana, Anatta, Sunyata, Nirodha, the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. These are just words pointing to the same thing. Here and now, it's like this. Now if you really pursue this, cultivate it, really bhavana with samadhi, then, even though your thinking mind does tend to take oneself over, but you're no longer committed to thinking or analyzing, but observing, puto, Bhutang saranang gacchami. It's through that we know Dhamma, ultimate reality, which is here and now, and our real home. So the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned, Nibbana, Anatta, Dhamma itself, they're not meant to be described or defined. They're merely directional signs, ways of reflecting. Like try to imagine not having a self with the thinking mind. I don't have any self. I can say that. I'm practiced all these years and I don't have any self left. But that's self itself, isn't it? But when you're in that state of suspended attentiveness, of awareness, sati sampajanya, there's consciousness, non-thinking, and if you recognize that, appreciate that, that's something you can really trust. Then instead of just seeing it as nothing, because on the personal level it doesn't seem like anything, because the personality, the conditioned realm, wants to fill it with something, it has to start thinking or analyzing. or describing or defining. So that, that's what the thinking mind's supposed to do. That's its function. And we are very much thinking creatures. The Pali word manusya means a creature that thinks. Mano. So this thinking, is a gift, but also a curse. Because if we're always thinking from avijja, from samaditthi, from sakkayaditthi, if our thoughts always come from the conditioned habits of sakkayaditthi, sila, bhatta, paramasa, vicikicca, no matter how clever our minds may be, or how many years we dedicate ourselves to meditation, you'll never understand, you'll never realize. So that's why I've always encouraged the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned is not as just another chant we do in evening puja, or because Ajahn Sumedho said we should learn it, but it's for reflection. And you can inquire into it, investigate. What is the unborn at this moment? And the thinking mind stops. Ask yourself that question, what is the unborn at this moment? And the thinking stops. And there's awareness of that's consciousness. But when the thinking mind stops, if we lack patience, and we want an answer, we want a definition of the unborn, then we start trying to figure it out. Trying to figure out what does that really mean. It's just a negation of the born. It's abstract concept. Doesn't seem very important. Because you can't really grasp it or get your minds around it. But you can open to it, and that's what sati sampajanya is all about. The escape hatch, the gate to the deathless. So noticing the absence of thought, being aware of non-thinking rather than trying to think about non-thinking, is like this. It's here and now. It's our true nature. And so the vicikicca, or doubt, the third fetter, is one of the ways to realize the path with samaditthi, to have insight into the absence of attachment, the gaps, the space, the intervals between the question itself and the arising of some conceptual desire, desire to conceive it as this or that, or dismiss it. It doesn't seem like anything. Because it's no thing, it's not a thing, but it is like this. And so this is like in the Eightfold Path really amounts to consciousness knowing itself. And this takes patience, patience, endurance, to bear with the tendencies, the habitual tendencies to try to conceive it or form opinions about it or just dismiss it. And then the Eight Folds, that's one way of describing the path. Is not really a path. You don't go anywhere. But there's this awakened knowing. Consciousness knows itself. That's the path, the Eightfold Path. And try to think about that. It can be, you get your mind in a twist again, but this is a reflective talk this evening. An encouragement to learn to trust this. I found over the years teaching meditation here in the UK, one of the problems that people have with Buddhist meditation is they're often very intelligent and well educated, read a lot of Buddhist literature, maybe have ordained, but they don't trust the reality of here and now. There's always this kind of lurking idea that you have to get something you don't have. That you're not good enough. And you've got to get rid of bad thoughts. Get rid of desire, get rid of greed, get rid of anger and aversion. And you should have a mind filled with loving kindness and compassion. And all this is conceptual proliferation, the sense of a self through the conditioning process, with concepts maybe you've acquired from Buddhist texts. So because you believe that this is true, that you are really have to get something you don't have and get rid of something you have that you don't want. And then meditation is always about doing something now, sitting in order to get samadhi. So I've got to get a certain level of samadhi in order to do vipassana. These are many of the teachings that teachers offer us. And in Thailand, the certain teachers always tell you that you've got to get appana samadhi or upachara samadhi before you can do vipassana. There's another teacher, used to be I don't know if he's still alive, but he used to talk about pure vipassana and no samatha. He'd say the word samatha like it was a dirty word. What are these? When we hear that, I'm not saying he's wrong, or the first one is wrong. It's not about right and wrong, but it's an opinion, isn't it? If I tell you you have to get something before you can meditate, you've got to get a certain level of concentration before you can do vipassana, you believe me. Some of you will, anyway. It's not that that's wrong, but you're acquiring an opinion from somebody else, from me, rather than trusting in the awareness of here and now. So this retreat has been in the aim is to affirm that for you, to encourage you. People don't trust, you can't trust your thoughts or your views and opinions, because they can change and be right, or they can be wrong according to other conditions. There's not absolute right or absolute wrong. So in speaking from my own practice, I was, first year I was a samanera before I met Luang Por. And when you're alone in a kuti by yourself for a year, it was about a year, I was living in Nong Khai province, northeast Thailand. And I put myself intentionally in such a position, and it was what they call Khao Hong type of meditation in Thailand. It means you go into your kuti and you stay there. You don't have to go to meetings or pujas or bindabat. They bring, a samanera would bring a tiffin carrier of food every day, and you were supposed to practice a certain meditation technique, which I had learned before I ordained. I'd spent 6 months living in Bangkok, teaching English, and started meditating at Wat Mahatat, which is in the very center of Bangkok. So I learned this technique, and I wanted to spend this year just practicing this technique. But before I ordained as a samanera in Nong Khai, I met another samanera, a Canadian samanera in Canada, from Canada. I met him in Vientiane in Laos, who said I should just put myself in the kuti and stay there and read the Four Noble Truths, the Word of the Buddha, a pamphlet published in Sri Lanka. So I did. I acquired this pamphlet. It's not very big. It has the basic teachings from the scriptures, from the suttas, with little interpretation. It was compiled by a German bhikkhu who I never met. I think he passed away many years before, called Jnanatiloka. So that first year, the first month, I felt about the first 3 days being alone in a kuti was like paradise. And I couldn't speak Thai, and then nobody could speak Bangkok Thai in the monastery. They all spoke Northeast dialect. They all spoke this dialect, and nobody could speak English. So I didn't have any. I just took this one book, Word of the Buddha, and didn't take any other literature. It was determined. I had this strong determination to break through to something real. And the first 3 days was fine, because suddenly you were away from everybody, all the impingement and demands, and I'd lived a very busy life in Bangkok, and most of my life has been, before I ordained, was a very busy one. That's the way you're brought up, to be busy, keep busy, work hard and keep busy, and don't be lazy. And suddenly I was in this kuti in the forest, and with nothing to do but this technique, which is very stylized technique where you do everything in slow motion. Well, I couldn't sustain that 24 hours a day. And then there were no distractions. I couldn't talk to anybody. And so, you'd hear one of the other summonaires inform me that there was a monk across the way in another kuti right across from mine who developed this technique to perfection. So I used to watch him. Everything was just so perfectly slow. It took him forever to eat a meal. And so I tried to do that. And I could see part of me wanted to impress the other monks in the monastery. Because they were praising this monk as he's our great, our success story. And then the proud, vain Sumedho wanted to be another one. So the first 3 months were a total failure. I gave up trying to do this practice. And instead I didn't know what to do. So I started reading Word of the Buddha. But I couldn't even concentrate on that, because when you lack the distractions that you're used to in order to accommodate your life, because in anyone's lifetime, you learn how to survive by suppressing all kinds of emotions. Because I was brought up in a family where you were not to show any anger. So I at the age of 30, I was, I had been quite successful at suppressing anger, at least I thought. And then when in a lay life I could do it, there were so many different ways to distract oneself when anger arose, or I just follow it and kind of, fortunately I didn't act on it usually, but I had an image of myself as a nice guy. Someone very nice. But during the first 3 months, there was nothing nice about me. Except I was safely accommodated in a kuti separate from everybody else. And I couldn't speak the native language. So what do you do when there's nowhere to go, nothing to do? So you'd find ways. I started watching the dogs in the monastery, and but something in me didn't want to leave. I could have left. Nobody was forcing me to stay there. So and the anger and resentment that I was feeling wasn't due to anything around me. People were, the monks, the mechis, the lay people were very good to me. So it wasn't, nobody was persecuting me or causing me to feel angry. But suddenly all this repressed anger of 30 years started coming into consciousness. And I'd ordained to find peace and bliss. That's what I wanted. The goal of my life was to attain a state of bliss and stay there forever. So that, and the first 3 months were like living in hell, because all this anger, resentment, fears, irrational fears would arise, and all I could do was just sit and stay, and not. There was nowhere to go, and no one to talk to, so you just endure it. And that seemed to, in some intuitive way, I was doing the right thing, because after 3 months, though, all this repressed fear, anger, resentment disappeared, and I became aware of a great luminosity. So I woke up one morning, and instead of feeling angry and resentful, I felt everything was covered in light and beautiful. And I thought, and I tried to think of something that would make me angry, and I couldn't do it. I could think of memories that would usually arouse anger, but didn't arouse any. So I thought I was enlightened. That was because I didn't have wisdom yet to understand what was happening. I didn't have the panya. But then I started reading the Word of the Buddha and applying that to that state of bliss lasted about 5-6 days, and then disappeared when I went to the immigration to renew my visa. And then to do something it was very unpleasant. And then I knew I wasn't enlightened. So this Word of the Buddha, I had this sense, you had to internalize it. There's dukkha, it should be understood, it has been understood. So it was this taking the Buddha's teaching and internalizing the teaching. It was in this pamphlet, Word of the Buddha. But then you can only read a pamphlet so many times. And Four Noble Truths is quite easy to remember on the sanya level, on the memory level. But to what do you mean by understand dukkha? So there was this observing, this ability to observe. And I noticed during the period of luminosity that I had before this, I started noticing what I refer to as sound of silence. A kind of resonating, vibratory. It's not really a sound. But I noticed if I rested in that, I'd go into tranquility, into equanimity. So it's an insight into the spaciousness or consciousness itself. But I didn't have the wisdom to understand it. And so during that first year, at the end of that year, a monk, a disciple of Luang Por Chah came. He was a Tudanga monk, one who wanders, and stayed at this monastery I was at in Nong Khai. And he's the one that informed me about Luang Por Chah, because I knew nothing before that. Luang Por Chah's fame had not reached Bangkok at all, or anyone I knew. So he convinced me to train as a Buddhist monk with Luang Por Chah. So I took the bhikkhu ordination in 1967 and spent the first pansa as a bhikkhu with Ajahn Chah. So, but developing this awareness around the Four Noble Truths is my guide, what I trust in, because I've used this for over 50 years. Just taking the simple, ordinary human experience of suffering, understanding it, second noble truth. I started observing, desire, and I found that very enlightening, the three kinds of desire, because my social conditioning, cultural conditioning was desire something, not something very good. And so you want to get rid of. First I thought a good Buddhist monk gets rid of all desires. This is how the kind of logic I used, and when I first interpreted, you get rid of it. And so I'm trying to get rid of desire. You can't get rid of it. It comes and goes. But you can understand it. This is a desire realm we're living in. This is all about desire, our physical forms, our bodies. We're here because of desire, tanha. So existence arises, things that have a beginning have an end. Desire has a beginning and an end. Desire, sensual desire for sense pleasures. Bhava-tanha, desire for attainment. I could see that. I began to contemplate my ambition to get something I don't have. I began to just observe wanting to get. I'd read also before that, Visuddhimagga, especially on the meditation, and so it creates this desire to get jhanas. So I was very much desiring to attain these blissful states. Desire to get something I don't have is like this, to attain something. You start observing the feeling of trying to get something you don't have is like this. It's ambition, isn't it? It's desire for attainment, desire for becoming. And then the vipavadana, desire to get rid of. So much of my life had been about vipavadana, trying to control, get rid of anger, get rid of desire. So the second noble truth, I really had a lot of insight into letting go of desire. So you experimented in letting go. Is one way of, first it becomes repression, get rid of it, let go of it. It can be interpreted as annihilating it. But notice that the first noble truth isn't annihilating dukkha, is it? It's not, there is dukkha and you should get rid of it. You should understand it. Desire is another condition that is suffering, and to understand it, to know it, like Kama-tanha is like this, Bhava-tanha is like this, Vipavadana is like this. If you keep investigating in this way, you see for yourself what it is, and that which is aware, the question that would arise in my mind, that which is aware of desire, what is that? Is that another sankhara? It always seemed like me, because I found anatta the concept of non-self, quite confusing. Because it always seemed like I was doing this meditation, and I'm the one that's having the insights. So when I met Luang Por Chah, then I said before, previous evening, his emphasis on Buddho, on the knowing, of desire. This consciousness is non-personal. It's anatta. So, you're conscious. Consciousness is like this. Trust that simplicity of knowing. Can you describe what it is to be conscious? Is it, can you define it for me? I can't, but I know consciousness. I know consciousness is like this. Then the Bhutto, the mantra, helps to reflect in that way, the knowing, because consciousness isn't annihilation. It's not a kind of going into a black hole, a void of nothingness. So the encouragement to, learn to trust this, not your opinions and views, because they can be right or wrong. But what you can trust is awareness. And to really respect that in yourself, see that as, this is the whole emphasis of the Buddha, sati sampajanya. The gate to the deathless is open. Trust in this. And what is the gate to the deathless? Then I can define it for as sati sampajanya. But it's just this open attentiveness to the present. It's a openness, a welcoming of the present moment. It's not trying to control or judge or define anything. And as you begin to trust that, it connects. Sati sampajanya isn't created, is not a sankhara. So it doesn't arise and cease. Your ability to be mindful comes and goes. But as you cultivate with samadhi, right understanding, cultivate bhavana, then you begin to see it's what you relax in, where you're nobody anymore. You're not trying to become anything or get rid of anything. You're not holding on to memories of the past or trying to purify yourself. So this is a great, this gift of the Buddha. I would never have been able to figure this out as a person. So I have enormous gratitude to the Buddha for giving this excellent, skillful means, so that we all of us here, can realize this for ourselves. It's possible. Every single one of us is conscious. And it's not like becoming a Buddhist or anything. It's not about joining a cult or a clan. It's learning to awaken to life itself from the confining misery of conditioning, the limitation of identity with the body and the personality and the emotions. So going to train with Luang Por Chah, then these teachings like Four Noble Truths, the dependent origination, all these the Pasanapumi teachings, the four foundations of mindfulness, they're very helpful in guiding our attention in a way that we can stay on the path. Samma Ditti, Samma Sangapo, Samma Vaja, Samma Gamanto, Samma Chivo, right speech, right action, right livelihood, leads to Samma Vayamo, Samma Sati, Samma Samadhi. Right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And even right is, I like the word perfect for the Eightfold Path. It's perfection itself. So I offer this as a reflection for this evening.